Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started as close to 9 o'clock as we can, so I invite you to fill up your coffee or water and find a seat. Yeah, as he's coming toward the podium to introduce this morning's speaker, I just want to take this opportunity to extend our thanks to Craig Mueller for his dedicated service on the Advisory Council. He doesn't work alone, but Sally, our director of worship, would tell you that the precision with which the liturgies are planned and executed is significantly due to Craig's influence, and we're grateful. Thank you.
I will say it right away that I am in the Sam Torvend fan club. I first knew Samuel when I did some writing for him when he was the first editor of Sundays and Seasons, which I believe is exactly 30 years ago, or around 30 years ago. I've also heard Samuel present plenaries here at ILS on several occasions. They are always well-paced and provocative. He was the presenter at the 2025 Feast of Creation Conference in Assisi that we heard about on Monday. Not only does Samuel have a love for liturgy and the church's tradition, his writing addresses contemporary concerns such as sacraments and social action, worship, and work. And the titles of these books say it best. Still Hungry at the Feast, Eucharistic Justice Amid Affliction. Luther and the Hungry Poor, Gathering Fragments. Monastic Ecological Wisdom, a Living Tradition. Jesus in Nature, a Monastic Christology. Samuel is a scholar, but also grounded in the liturgical assembly. He is an affiliate priest for adult formation at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Seattle. And among many things that we share in common, one you may not know is that we are both Benedictine oblates connected to St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota. The very long sentence in his biography, which you can read later, is that he is the faculty fellow in humanities and university chair in Lutheran Studies Emeritus at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma. Please join me in welcoming the Reverend Dr. Samuel Torvend.
Well, I'm grateful for the, already. There. I'm grateful for the invitation to be with you, and let me just say I'm just glad to be here with you. I want to, before I begin, I want to make a little plug. I hope you won't mind this. It's about Associated Parishes for Liturgy and Mission. I, last September, was elected the president of this group, which was founded in 1946 by 12 clergy who were dismayed, utterly dismayed, with what they considered the moribund state of worship in the churches. Some of you are nodding your heads like you know what that means. Their work led to the reform of Episcopal and Anglican rites, the recovery of the ecclesiology, baptismal ecclesiology and ministry, Anglicans catching up with Lutherans 500 years later on that one, the centrality of the Eucharist on Sunday, the restoration of the adult catechumenate, embracing a 3-year lectionary, and the restoration of the vocational diaconate. In recent years, APLM has been happy to welcome Lutherans in Canada and the United States in our shared partnership in liturgical renewal. Our particular gift is forming the relationship between liturgy and mission, worship and work, sacrament and service. At the table in the back, you'll find a welcome brochure. There are a few left for your taking. I hope you would consider joining our happy band. We meet monthly with a webinar on a particular liturgical topic. We have regional conferences, 2 publications, and a whole lot of other stuff that's kind of fun. So enough for the commercial. So you might have a handout, or you might find the handout on your cell or tablet that relates to this presentation. I'll simply be offering a gloss on that. It's in 2 parts. So part 1, here we go. The earliest description of the Christian liturgy dates from the 2nd century, a commentary with which many of you may well be familiar, the first apology of Justin Martyr, writing in Rome to the Roman Emperor Antoninus Pius. He was not all that pious. In that significant and precious document, Justin wrote that, quote, "We hold this meeting of the Christian assembly on the day of the sun, since it is the first day on which God, having transformed darkness and matter, made the world." Who's this? Are you here? There you are, sweet Ben. Okay. It is a good photo. This was not taken at Assisi, I think. Am I right about that? Or did you wear a chasuble the entire time you were in Assisi? So in his paper given in May of 2025 at the Assisi Conference on the Feast of the Creation, or the Creator, there's some doubt as what the name is going to be, right? Ben noted that Justin first mentions God's creation of the world, and then Justin goes on to say, on this same day, Jesus Christ, our Savior, rose from the dead. One might suggest, opined Dr. Stewart, that the Christian keeping of Sunday is always a feast of God, the Creator, and God's creation. Something, I say, that has been frequently overlooked in the history, theology, preaching, and teaching of the liturgy. Now, I do not intend to diminish the significance of Sunday as the day on which the risen Christ first appears and continues to appear to be present to and with the assembly gathered around Word and Sacrament. But it can give one pause to consider that Sunday commemorates the triune God as Creator and the first gift of God's grace as the creation. Of course, any talk among Christians concerning the creation may assume that Christians actually have experience of the creation, of the natural world. But then one is reminded that over 80% of all Americans and Canadians live in urban settings, a sharp change from 57% who lived in rural areas prior to the Second World War. That's a significant change. Our early medieval ancestors, I do lots of research on early medievals. They're among my best friends, As my students say, you just deal with dead people all the time. I go, that's right, and they're still speaking. Our early medieval ancestors were well versed in reading the book of Scripture, as well as what they called the book of nature. After all, the vast majority of early medieval Christians were sustained by agricultural economies, their lives shaped primarily by the rising and setting of the sun, and the ever-changing natural seasons of the year. But I'm not sure that reading the book of nature is a required or even recommended study in seminaries today. I think it should be. I don't think it's happening, or at least as widely as it should be. During the lockdown in 2020, my spouse and I would take a lengthy walk after lunch through our neighborhood in Western Washington, a neighborhood filled with Douglas firs and a protected population of large Oregon white oaks, many of the oaks close to 400 years old. At the same time, I started to read The Hidden Life of Trees, what they feel, how they communicate, discoveries from a sacred world, the revelatory and actually controversial study by the German forester Peter Wohlleben. In Hidden Life, Wohlleben suggests that trees communicate with each other through mycorrhizal networks, fungal networks. Sounds a little creepy, but it's not. They send nutrients to weaker trees and offer warnings to each other of dramatic changes in weather. As we walked among the trees, it dawned on me I can be a slow learner, that we were and are surrounded by a living community of evergreens and oaks who were speaking with each other. I began to wonder, what are they communicating to me, another creature in God's diverse creation? What did the psalmist say? All the trees of the forest sing for joy to the Lord. And ancient Isaiah notes that, quote, the trees of the field clap their hands. Or in the words of the Hungarian hymn writer Imre Pacelli, the tree of life speaks, saying, come to me, you weary. Give me your sickness. Give me all your sorrow. I will give blessing. I don't think Imre Pacelli in the 17th century knew that trees transform our carbon dioxide into oxygen. That's a true blessing. So my first encouragement is this. If one is going to highlight Sunday as the first day of creation, or if one plans to support a feast of the Creator or of the creation, it would seem most appropriate to learn how to read the book of nature found in one's local ecology. I think this is an urgent matter given that the current federal administration is dismantling every protection of the environment, what we as Christians call God's creation. Indeed, the nation and the world will continue to face increasing warming, drought, famine, flooding, and water shortages. Meteorologists report that life-threatening heat waves will strain hospitals and power grids, endanger workers, and harm elderly adults, people like me, as well as low-income residents in the nation's many cities. I come from a region of the country in which we experienced torrential rains this past winter that caused historic, catastrophic flooding and massive landslides that caused widespread evacuations, major power outages, the destruction of homes, churches, and businesses, and transportation disruptions. The environmental crisis is not something out there or over there. It is in our front yards. To read the book of nature is to recognize where there is environmental strength and environmental weakness in one's local ecology. So on the left side of the slide, you see the annual report of Communities for a Healthy Bay. That is a group of activists, marine biologists, and volunteers who work to keep the bay in Tacoma as clean as possible. That's a sign of environmental strength. On the right, you see one of the towns north of Seattle that experienced catastrophic flooding during the month of December, a sign of environmental weakness. And then there is this. In Evangelical Worship, in the Book of Common Prayer, 1979, in the Canadian Book of Alternative Services, and in the Scottish Episcopal Liturgy of Holy Baptism, the newly baptized and the assembly, in affirming the baptismal covenant, promise to, quote, care for God's creation, or to protect and restore the beauty of creation. Who knew that this prosaic vow, given the environmental crisis, would carry a political overtone? After all, the wounding of God's creation for the sake of corporate and elite profit is rightly met with resistance from those who recognize the creation as the first gift of God's grace. Now, when Justin speaks of baptism, he notes that catechumens are brought to the water and baptized in the name of pay attention to this, Lord of the universe. I ask you to note the cosmic dimension of that title, Lord of the universe, and in the name of the Savior, Jesus Christ, and the Holy Spirit. When he speaks of the Eucharist, he notes that bread and a cup of wine mixed with water are brought to the President of the Assembly, who offers thanksgiving prior to the distribution to those who are present, as well as the sending of the gifts to those who are absent with the deacons. Here I point to Justin's mention of the gifts of creation: water, wheat, harvested then ground to flour for bread; grapes, harvested, crushed, and fermented for wine. What this brief description seems to tell me is this: without the creation, how could the materiality of the liturgy and the sacraments even exist? Without the creation, how could the materiality of the liturgy and the sacraments even exist? Could you imagine a liturgy without water, olive oil or chrism, cotton or linen vesture, without bees and beeswax and the great pillar of the Paschal candle, without local bread and wine and billowing clouds of incense, without palms and ashes, floral wreaths, and the ever-changing colors of the year? Why, without the materiality of the creation, we would be left with nothing but a naked auditorium, a preacher in a pair of jeans, and a praise band singing very loudly the same 7 words 11 times. That's what my sainted Lutheran pastor father referred to as 7-Eleven music. And so you can imagine every time I drive by a 7-Eleven what I think about. This is to say that if one lives in a sacramental world, and I hope all of you live in a sacramental world, one in which the triune and creating God is praised, and in which the gifts of the creation are received with thanksgiving, materiality and matter truly matter. Bodies and the 5 senses of the body truly matter. Oops. Indeed, in their portrayal of Jesus, the evangelists go to great lengths to underscore his materiality, his existence as an earthy existence, to underscore his actions and interactions with the gifts of creation and his use of the natural world in his sayings and parables. As we know, the evangelists focused on the materiality of his existence in order to critique and subvert the Gnostic notion that his physicality was nothing more than a cheap masquerade hiding what they considered his far superior and immortal spirit. So my second encouragement is this. Let us consider and reflect on how the creation in all its diversity marks the Sunday gathering for the Holy Communion, a gathering which may well include holy baptism. How then might hymn, sermon, intercessions, and the welcoming of the elements drawn from the natural world cultivate a creation consciousness in the worshiping assembly? In the parish where I serve, the formation of those preparing for baptism and confirmation begins not with a text, but with our rather capacious font. It is in this font that we dip our hands into the waters that flow freely. Our formation begins with smelling the fragrant chrism that will mark foreheads, with holding a paten of baked bread, smelling and tasting it, with holding a chalice and then tasting the wine created in one of our state's many viticultural zones. Sorry, I'm just a partisan for Washington wines. I wish you had more of them here in Indiana. You would rejoice. In touching and smelling the beeswax of our candles, smelling it, and the incense with which the newly baptized and confirmed will be honored. And only then, after all of that, only then, reflecting together on our experience of these gifts of God's good creation. As someone who has served as a director of adult faith formation for most of my public life, I want to say this. The doing of the liturgy possesses its own formative effect. It certainly does. An effect that some recognize after a lifetime of active and conscious participation in the liturgy. But let me add, formation in liturgy is not a strong suit among us. And so I hope that you are able to set aside time separate from the liturgy to engage in an intentional process of liturgical formation. Such a process has been amply studied and presented by Gil Ostick, Franciscan priest and professor emeritus of liturgy at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, in his Catechesis for Liturgy and his Mystagogy of the Eucharist. For a version of the process we use in my parish and in associated parishes, I've got copies you're welcome to take during the session allotted for reflection on this presentation. I can't stress enough how significant this work is in helping parishioners move from being interested participants in the liturgy to maturing practitioners in the liturgy, from interested participants to maturing practitioners who have internalized the church's liturgical and sacramental riches and so act in accord with these riches. We make a mistake if we think that the publication of renewed or reformed liturgies is the end of the process of liturgical and thus ecclesial renewal. Rather, it is, newsflash, the beginning, one that calls for our continual attention to the ecumenical pattern and essential elements of worship and their welcome of God's gifts of the earth. So to part two. Again, a quotation from Justin in his description of the liturgy of the Sunday assembly. After the communion, those who are well off and willing give what they desire, and what is collected is deposited with the president, who sees to the care of orphans and widows, those who through sickness or any other cause are in want, those who are imprisoned, and the workers, that would be the migrants, sojourning among us. In a word, he looks after all who are in need. Justin, I think, presents us with a remarkable trajectory. Those who have been served by the crucified and risen Christ in the Holy Supper then turn toward those who are in need in order to serve them. The diaconia of the ecclesial liturgy is extended by the diaconia of the assembly at service in the world. There is no offering or offertory prior to the great Thanksgiving. Shock there. One that could easily give the impression that one pays in order to participate in the communion. A collection, not an offering, takes place at the end of the liturgy, the collection drawing the assembly into the suffering of the world as it is being dismissed into daily life. And so I wonder, in our many assemblies, is it abundantly clear that a collection is directed toward those who are in need? Is that abundantly clear? Or do worshipers imagine that a collection of money simply keeps the lights on and subsidizes the clergy pension fund? Do members of the worshiping assembly recognize that the liturgy is orienting them to service, witness, advocacy, and even protest in daily life? I ask these questions because I believe they pertain to the keeping of Sunday, of a season of creation, or a feast of the Creator or the creation. In his significant encyclical, Laudato Si' on Care for Our Common Home, Pope Francis of blessed memory made clear that his encyclical should be interpreted as part of the Church's social teaching, not simply a call to care for the environment. We are faced not with two separate crises, he wrote, one environmental and the other social, but rather with one complex crisis which is both social and environmental. It needs to be said, he continued, that there is little awareness of the problems which especially affect excluded people, billions of people on the face of the earth. This is due to the fact that many professionals, opinion makers, communications media, and centers of power being located in affluent urban areas are far removed from the poor and have little direct contact with their problems. Thus, today, we have to recognize that the true ecological approach is always a social approach in order to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. In order to hear the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. In a recent study produced by the Center for American Progress, the authors note that, quote, in the United States today, the color of one's skin or the size of one's bank account is a solid predictor of whether one has safe access to nature and its benefits. As a result, low-income communities, communities of color, and low-income families with children have deteriorated drinking water quality, worsened air pollution, greater vulnerability to heat, drought, and floods, greater exposure to disease, and less resilience to the impacts of climate change, end quote. This is to suggest, dear colleagues, that any call and any work to care for the natural world alone, in my estimation, is insufficient when those caught in poverty and disability, as well as gender and racial injustice, are overlooked. I've written elsewhere on the ways in which the churches have embraced the environmental crisis, all to the good for us, and have promoted creation consciousness with outdoor Eucharists, holy hikes in forests and on beaches, the blessings of bodies of water, creation hymn texts, and wilderness liturgies. Yet what is frequently missing from such efforts is the recognition of those who suffer most, from the warming and pollution created by Earth's wealthier nations, especially China and the United States. And so my third encouragement, let us be attentive to those in our cities, towns, or regions who, caught in poverty, live in degraded ecologies. On the left, you can see a chart, a diagram of the metropolitan Chicago area. The darkest red shows where the greatest heat and hazardous health is located. In the center, you see the devastating fires in Los Angeles, and on the right, you see a chemical plant that has been suffering from a hurricane in Houston, releasing toxic chemicals. Guess what? Toxic chemicals into the poorest neighborhoods. Until I did this myself, I was not aware of a large section of Seattle with low-income neighborhoods populated by people of color who experience extremely high levels of pollution. On the left, you can see the darkest red is around this particular neighborhood. And on the right, you can see the neighborhood to the left there. Can you see the freeway on the right-hand side? And if you look up, you can see another freeway coming down on the left-hand side. So on both sides, this neighborhood is surrounded by freeways. The freeway on the western side, closest to the Puget Sound, is lined with industrialization and polluting industrialization. Got it? Those who live with this toxic contamination report high levels of respiratory disease and cancer, due in large part to the presence of polluting industries that border their section of the city. Real estate agents label these residential neighborhoods as hazardous. Do you think anyone is going to want to buy a house in a hazardous neighborhood? I think not. There is little tree canopy to lower temperatures, filter air pollutants, and manage stormwater runoff. Surrounded by heat-producing freeways, this one section of the city is dominated by its own heat dome that locks in higher temperatures in the summer, higher than any other part of the city. The difference is 10 degrees. That's an astonishing change by going 2 blocks out of this neighborhood. And this all takes place in a neighborhood where people are unable to afford any form of air conditioning. Of the 18 churches in this section of the city, only 2, a United Church of Christ and a United Reformed Parish, have become active partners with the Neighborhood Council to address the environmental degradation that diminishes and degrades the lives of those who live there. Believe me, there are Lutheran churches there, there are Episcopal churches there, there are Roman Catholic churches there, there are lots of sacramental churches there who have not got on board. And so I wonder, how would a feast of the Creator or the creation benefit the 135 million Americans, a third of the population, who live in polluted neighborhoods or in neighborhoods adjacent to Superfund sites? One might ask the same question of the increasingly popular paraliturgical season of creation. I wonder, do our neighbors who suffer the wounding of God's creation enter into our preaching, interceding, singing, teaching, service, and advocacy? In the parish where I serve, we now include an intercession in the prayers for the endangered species in our region, and we name them. Endangered birds one Sunday with all 10 named. Endangered fish on another Sunday with 11 named. Endangered animals on yet another Sunday, and endangered neighborhoods, Beacon Hill, Georgetown, South Park, the Duwamish Valley. The practice of naming moves us from the generic and abstract to the specific and local. Members of the Assembly have reported that they were at first startled by the specificity of the naming. The northern spotted owl, the marbled murrelet, and the streaked horned lark. It's a mouthful for an intercessor to practice. But they then recognized that the intercessions allowed them to pray for human and other than human creatures throughout the coming week in very specific ways. I then wonder, do those who pollute and degrade God's good creation or sanction such pollution and degradation enter into our preaching, praying, teaching, and advocacy? In my state, the significant polluters are 3M, the beleaguered Boeing Company, British Petroleum, DuPont, Shell Oil, and numerous military bases. PLU, the university where I've been for my entire life almost, is on one side of a military base. My spouse and I live on the other side of the military base. 10 years ago, we discovered, guess what? It's a Superfund site that is contaminating our water supply. As you may well know, the current federal administration is committed to increasing coal mining, oil, and gas leasing on federal lands, has abolished over 80% of the regulations that protect water, air, and soil, has repealed greenhouse gas emission standards for vehicles, is gutting the Environmental Protection Agency, and has withdrawn from the Paris Agreement. Thus, to keep Sunday as the first day on which God made the world, and to keep a feast of the Creator or the creation can serve, I say, as a critique, as a form of resistance, as a potent alternative to those powers that diminish, degrade, and deal death for God's creation and the many who suffer from such degradation. In this, I take inspiration from Ambrose of Milan, John Chrysostom, Hildegard of Bingen, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Martin Luther King, and Dorothy Day, all who publicly criticized politicians, business leaders, and social elites for the harm they visited upon their neighbors. Indeed, it was Luther, imagine this, it was Luther who taught us that out of love for one's neighbors who are in peril, out of love for one's neighbors who are in peril, not for oneself, but for one's neighbors, the Christian must call political and social leaders to account for the harm they have sanctioned or inflicted. What did he say? There are many bishops and preachers in the preaching office, but they do not stand and serve God faithfully. On the contrary, they lie down or otherwise play with their office. These are the lazy and worthless preachers who do not tell the princes and lords their sins. And so my fourth encouragement. I think it most appropriate that pastors, preachers, teachers, catechists, musicians, and greening ministries consider the ways in which a feast of creation and a season of creation that flows from it can serve as the opportunity to speak honestly and with love, on behalf of those who suffer greatly from executive orders, policies, and laws that harm one's neighbors, human and other than human. But I recognize this is no easy thing to do. The fear that can silence public ministers is this: speaking the truth will mean the possible loss of members or the accusation of political partisanship. As one pastor noted at a recent retreat I attended, quote, "I think I have faltered at times in preferring parish unity over preaching the truth of the gospel and what we profess in the liturgy." And yet what we profess in the foundational and life-orienting sacrament of holy baptism, as indicated in ELW, are the solemn promises to care for others, to care for the world God made, and to work for justice and peace. To these promises, the Episcopal rite of holy baptism adds these: to renounce the evil powers of this world, which corrupt and destroy the creatures of God, all creatures, not just human beings, to respect the dignity of every human being, to cherish the wondrous works of God, and protect and restore the beauty and integrity of all creation. The sponsors of the gatherings at Assisi focused on the establishment of a feast of the Creator or the creation have noted that their work is inspired by the ancient liturgical tradition of the Orthodox Church, the keeping of September 1, a day devoted to the praise of God as Creator and to reflection on the great mystery that everything has been created through Christ. They write that this practice, quote, "inspires us to care for the gift of the created world." Much time and energy were spent in 3 Assisi gatherings, 2 ecumenical and 1 Roman Catholic, in discussing the theological, Christological, and liturgical dimensions of the proposed feast. But little attention was given to those who suffer with environmental degradation. At the 3rd gathering in May 25, just 1 breakout session, not a plenary, but 1 optional breakout session was devoted to eco-theology, indigenous people, and people of the global South, with speakers from regions and countries suffering the greatest from global warming, pollution, and development by wealthy nations, including our own, eager to harvest their natural resources. And so I return to the encouragement offered by Pope Francis, who was a pastor and a bishop who ministered in the ecologically degraded shantytown slums of Buenos Aires. Today, we have to recognize that the true ecological approach always becomes a social approach in order to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. And so I say yes to Sunday as the day that celebrates the triune God, continually bringing the world into existence. And yes to an ecumenical feast of the creation in Christ, and yes to a season of creation, but not without those who suffered terribly from the environmental crisis. What Francis encourages us, dear colleagues, is to open our ears to the cry of the poor in our local and regional ecologies, and in hearing this cry, be moved to offer our advocacy before the powers and principalities what the letter to the Ephesians referred to as the rulers and authorities of this present darkness. In his commentary on the Apostles' Creed on God, the maker of heaven and earth, Luther wrote that, quote, "We confess that God the Father has not only given us all that we have and see before our eyes, but daily preserves and defends us against all evil and misfortune, averts all sorts of danger and calamity, and does this all out of pure love and goodness without our merit, as a benevolent Father who cares for us that no evil befall us." I think the juxtaposition of the gift of the creation set next to the need to be defended from danger and calamity should not be lost on us. In our preaching, teaching, singing, praying, and service, I encourage us to hold the two together so that thanksgiving for the creation leads us to supplication for our sisters and brothers, human and other than human, who live daily with danger and calamity. After all, who among us would not want to know that we have acted in accord with the benevolent will of God, who cares for us so that no evil befall us? That's it.
Sam, thank you for both your encouragement and for calling us to account. The next thing on our schedule is Matins with the Valparaiso University community over in the chapel. That begins at 10:10, and then we'll be on workshop session C at 10:45. Matins ends at 10:30, so you'll have plenty of time to get from one place to the other. I'll be in the narthex of the chapel to give you any guidance as you need to find the locations of your workshop sessions. One thing that didn't make it into the morning announcements, a small pouch of medication was left behind after Vespers last night in the chapel, and it's out at the registration desk. So if you're missing something, check in with Rachel and Betsy to see if it is there for you. Thank you very much.